You step out of your front door completely naked. You walk down the busy street. No one stares. No one cares. You are entirely comfortable because everyone else is naked too. For the vast majority of human history, this was not a bizarre stress dream. This was simply everyday life. You woke up naked. You hunted naked. You raised your children naked. For millions of years, your ancestors did not wear a single shred of clothing. They did not feel shame. They did not feel exposed. They were perfectly adapted to the world exactly as they were. Then, something changed. Suddenly, a naked ape decided to wrap itself in the dead skin of another animal. And it was not because they suddenly developed a sense of modesty. Evolution does not care about your manners. Evolution only cares about keeping you alive. So why did you put on a shirt this morning? To understand the bizarre truth behind your wardrobe, we have to look back at how your body was built. You are a biological anomaly. If you look at our closest primate relatives, the chimpanzees and the gorillas, they are covered in thick, dark fur. Fur is fantastic. It protects the skin from the sun. It acts as a natural armor against scratches. It insulates the body against the cold night air. But your ancestors gave all of that up. Anthropologist Nina Jablonski at Penn State University has spent her career studying the evolution of human skin. Her research points to a radical shift in how our ancestors hunted in the sweltering heat of the African savanna. As the forests shrank and the open grasslands expanded, early humans had to travel farther and faster to find food. They became endurance runners. But running generates massive amounts of internal heat. If an animal covered in thick fur runs for miles under the midday sun, its brain will literally cook inside its skull. Most predators, like lions or cheetahs, have to rest during the hottest parts of the day. They sprint and then they pant to cool down. Your ancestors evolved a completely different strategy. They lost their fur. They multiplied their sweat glands. They turned their entire skin surface into a highly efficient evaporative cooling system. This meant your ancestors could hunt at high noon. They could simply jog their prey to death, tracking an antelope hours until the animal collapsed from heat exhaustion. Being naked was your ancestral superpower. It made you the ultimate endurance predator of the tropics. So if being naked was such an incredible evolutionary advantage, why did we ever cover up? Finding the answer to that question is notoriously difficult for archaeologists. Animal hides rot. Plant fibers decay. Leather turns to dust. You cannot simply dig up a 200,000-year-old pair of pants. The physical evidence of the very first clothing has vanished completely from the fossil record. But scientists found a loophole. They realized that to figure out when we started wearing clothes, they did not need to look at the clothes themselves. They just needed to look at a parasite. Enter Dr. Mark Stoneking and his genetics team at the Max Planck Institute. They did not dig in the dirt for ancient fabrics. They looked at lice. Specifically, they looked at the DNA of human body lice. You see, human head lice live exclusively in the hair on your scalp. But human body lice are a completely different creature. They have evolved to live exclusively in the fibers of clothing. They cling to the threads of your shirts and pants, only dropping down onto your bare skin to feed on your blood before retreating back into the fabric. If there are no clothes, body lice cannot exist. They literally have no habitat. By looking at the genetic mutations between head lice and body lice, Stoneking and his colleagues used a technique called a molecular clock. This is a way of counting the steady, predictable changes in DNA over time to see exactly when one species split into two. The genetic data revealed a shocking timeline. Body lice split away from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago. That is the exact moment your ancestors put on their very first outfits. The lice were waiting in the wings, ready to colonize this brand new wearable ecosystem. But why then? What exactly was happening 170,000 years ago that forced a perfectly adapted, naked, sweating ape to suddenly cover up? The Earth threw a curveball. The climate broke. Anthropologist Ian Gilligan from the University of Sydney has spent years studying the relationship between human evolution and sudden climate shifts. He points out that around this exact time, the planet entered a severe glacial period. This was a brutal, catastrophic drop in global temperatures. The lush, warm environments your body was built for began to vanish. Let us reconstruct a day during this climatic nightmare. You are living in a world that is rapidly freezing. The sun is weak. The wind is sharp. You are losing body heat faster than your metabolism can generate it. You have fire, of course. You can sit in the back of the cave and stay warm. But fire stays in the cave. You cannot hunt a mammoth from inside your living room. Eventually, you have to go out into the biting, lethal cold to find food. Your bare, hairless skin, which used to be your greatest weapon, is now a fatal liability. Frostbite is taking the fingers and toes of your tribe members. Hypothermia is a constant, terrifying stalker. You do not put on an animal skin because you want to look civilized. You do not put it on for fashion. You pin a massive, heavy, bloody predator hide across your shoulders because the alternative is freezing to death before the sun goes down. But here is the counterintuitive twist. Wearing those early clothes was not a sudden, glorious evolutionary leap. It was a miserable, desperate trap. Those early garments were terrible. They were just raw, stiff hides draped awkwardly over the body. They did not fit well. They trapped dangerous moisture against the skin. They incubated bacteria. They invited those blood-sucking parasites we just talked about. Your ancestors traded the immediate risk of freezing to death for the chronic risk of deadly skin infections and parasitic disease. It was a brutal compromise. In fact, for tens of thousands of years, clothing was just an emergency blanket. When the climate warmed up again, your ancestors likely threw the heavy hides away and went right back to being naked. It was only when they decided to migrate out of Africa and permanently settle in the freezing environments of Europe and Asia that clothing became a permanent fixture of the human body. And to survive in the deep freeze of the Ice Age, a draped animal hide was no longer going to cut it. We had to invent technology. We had to invent tailoring. If you look at the famous archaeological site of Sungir in Russia, which dates back about 30,000 years, the evidence of this technological leap is staggering. Archaeologists did not just find the bones of ancient humans. They found remains buried in complex, tailored garments that had been painstakingly stitched together. These outfits were decorated with thousands of hand-carved ivory beads. More importantly, archaeologists found bone needles with tiny eyes drilled into them. This changes everything. A bone needle means you are no longer just tying a dead animal around your neck. It means you are cutting, shaping, and sewing tight-fitting, layered garments. You are creating waterproof outer shells and insulating inner layers. You are manipulating animal furs to trap a microclimate of warm air directly against your skin. You are not just wearing a blanket, you are building a wearable environment. And that wearable environment allowed your ancestors to do something no other primate had ever done in the history of the planet. It allowed a fragile, hairless, tropical ape to walk out of the warm savanna and conquer the frozen world. Your ancestors marched across the icy tundra. They survived the deep freeze of Neanderthal Europe. They trekked across the frozen land bridge into the Americas. Clothes were the very first spacesuits. They insulated human biology from the lethal extremes of the outside world, allowing us to spread to every single corner of the globe. Without the desperate invention of clothing, human beings would have remained geographically trapped in the tropics forever. We would be a localized species, entirely dependent on warm weather. Instead, we used our massive brains to borrow the evolutionary adaptations of other animals. We took the thick hide of the mammoth, the dense fur of the wolf, and the warm down of the bird, and we made them our own. Which brings us back to you. You wake up when your body is ready. You stretch. You walk over to your closet. You slide into a pair of soft cotton underwear. You pull a woven t-shirt over your head. You step into a pair of denim jeans. You check the weather on your phone to decide if you need to grab a heavy jacket or a light sweater. You do not think about the brutal, freezing wind of the Pleistocene. You do not think about the desperate hunters who risk deadly infections just to stay warm. You do not think about the microscopic parasites that change their entire genetic code to live in your shirt. You do not think about the brilliant, freezing humans who spent hours carving tiny holes into slivers of bone just to stitch a sleeve together. You do not think about how that fabric against your skin is the only reason your species managed to conquer the earth. You just get dressed. You step out of your front door.